Welcome to the Worth Listening podcast, where we focus on having positive and productive conversations about money. Join your host, Lauren Williams, four-time Olympian turned financial planner, as her guests share their stories about how they manage money. We aim to help you own your personal money story and feel good talking about it. Lauren will teach you that money is a tool that can help you live the life you want. You should feel comfortable listening, sharing, and communicating about it. And now, here's your host, Lauren Williams.
Welcome to the Worth Listening podcast. It's me, Lauren, your host. And today I'm excited to have Andrew Post share his money memoir. Andrew is currently Senior Vice President of Invo Healthcare, but has held many education-focused jobs and is so well-versed on the education system. With wages and teachers taking center stage lately, he shares perspective on saving for retirement amidst income restraints. Andrew and I discuss how he ended up with student loans despite having a free education option available for him. And we also talk about his decision to buy a home and why he says it was super easy, but there were some things beyond the mortgage he didn't know to prepare for. All right. Welcome to the Worth Listening podcast, everyone, and in particular, our guest today, Andrew. Andrew, tell us a little bit about yourself. Let's just start by getting to know you a little bit.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you for having me. I was born and raised in Miami, Florida, the best city on the planet. I live with both my parents who went to the University of Miami, so it was predestined that that's where I would go. My father was in insurance and real estate. My mom worked at the University of Miami. I have one sister who's 5 years younger than me and had a very good childhood. Enjoyed my time. Luckily, did not have to worry about things that others do have to worry about. And so things were very good for me. I now have a wife, 2 kids, a great job. Like many others in this changing times, I work from home and travel a lot. And so I get to spend countless hours with my kids doing school activities, home, and still being able to be productive. So life is good.
The work-life balance that they say all us millennials want. That's awesome.
100%.
Let's pause there for a second and talk a little bit more about your first memory of money in your childhood.
Probably, I don't know if it's a memory of money, but I guess somewhere early on that entrepreneurial spirit kicked in where I thought I could do anything. And so you could tell that money was a driver to that. And so I wrote the Seattle Kingdom with upgrades I thought they should do to their stadium. Mind you, I've never been to Seattle. I had never been to the Kingdom. I know nothing about stadiums or architecture or design or anything, but it seemed like a good idea. And I'd say that that's probably because my parents did well. I had friends who had a lot more money, but ultimately that, I guess early on, I was, I don't even know, 11 years old, maybe when that happened, 12. You knew you had to do something big and different to make the money to afford the things that you at least think you want when you're 11. And so I typed a letter and mailed it off. And from then continued with crazy things like that. Sent shoe ideas to Nike or Reebok or whoever it was on what they should do. I have had no experience in that either, of course. But I think that's my first inkling that money was going to matter. And if you wanted to make it, you had to think outside the box and you had to do things a little bit differently and try to take control of the situation. And so that was my crazy way of doing so at 11 years old.
I think that's pretty awesome that your entrepreneurial spirit was born and you were going after it. Did you have any sorts of jobs or entrepreneurial things that you did during your childhood?
I really wasn't. I was not one of the sell lemonade in the front yard or anything like that. That wasn't me. But much like today, it's more grand scale things. It was less about how could I make a quick dollar and how could I set something up to make a lot more than a quick dollar. And interestingly enough, like a therapy session, like that's kind of where I am today. It's not about what can you get someone to buy? It's how can you make a difference and make that sustainable to something big and different. But it was the same way when I was younger.
Yeah. What kind of relationship in the household was there? Like, did you talk to your sister about money? Were your parents instilling the importance of savings? What kind of conversations were being had in your household about?
Really not many. I never really heard much talk about money. I mean, obviously, we were solid middle class and there wasn't the worry around it every day. At the same time, like I said, you could see around you that people had more than we did, but we took vacations to Marco Island. My parents always talked about our Florida prepaid account. Only one of the two of us ended up using, but there was the kind of behind the curtain talk of it just in that we knew we had a college savings account, things like that. But there was no real talk about it. There wasn't talk about credit cards, when to use them, why not to use them a lot. I never really heard any of that in my house. So it's good and bad, right? At the end of the day, I didn't worry when I was younger about money, which is great. And unfortunately, children that I've worked with in my professional career don't have that luxury. At the same time, I think when you don't worry about it, you're also a little less cognizant of the nuances around making money, saving money, doing those things because it didn't come up.
Uh-huh. All right. So you go off to college. You said you went to the U. I happen to know this, but we can let our listeners know.
That's right. No better place until it's my kids because that's expensive. But yes, for me, 4 years at the University of Miami.
So was that a free education because you had a parent that worked there?
It was. So tuition, I had tuition remission. My mother is an associate dean there, or was. And so I did not have to pay for college for tuition. But I did have to pay room and board because I did live on campus my freshman and sophomore year, and then books and, anything else. And so interesting point because I still pay and will be paying for a while student loans on even the portion of expenses that I did have to pay at the University of Miami. Whereas, truth be told, if I had used my college prepaid instead of going to the University of Miami, I probably would have no debt. Right?
Oh, so that's interesting because I think a lot of people would think, oh, you had this prepaid thing. You should have been able to use it. And if you got the free education, why couldn't you use the rest of the prepay for the other expenses that you were having for school? So that brings up a good point that the Florida prepay doesn't cover all aspects of getting your education.
It won't cover the private school prices. So because I got free tuition, I could have used that money for books and something else. But the reality is the way Florida prepaid works, which is why I have it for my kids, is you lock in the rate when they're born for 18 years later. So that whole account that would have paid for my college had $9,000 in it, which, as you know, when we went to school, wouldn't pay a year of room and board, let alone your entire college. And so the long and short of it is it kind of didn't matter because there wasn't enough in there to even pay for 1 year of that stuff, let alone the rest. And again, I could have lived at home. I could have done those things, but that was part of the college experience.
For sure. Can you talk a little bit about, like you said, what exactly the college experience was from a financial standpoint? Because usually it's like high school, you're under your parents' roof, you're kind of following their rules, you're starting to feel a little more independent. And then college is this first time that people feel like I'm grown, I'm an adult, I can do this myself. But you do kind of have some luxuries of supervision in college before you go out into the real world. So, but this is the first chance that you can maybe make your own financial decisions and things like that. So talk a little bit about how you managed your finances in college and what your general college experience was like.
Yeah. So unfortunately, my parents split up when I was 15. So I did end up with a job. I did after school care counseling. I was a supervisor for the after school care early on. So when I was 16, 17. So I was making and having to budget money in high school as well. Not that my parents couldn't help out, but those expensive senior year activities in high school was a lot of the money that I made. And so when I got to college, it actually wasn't that big a shock to me just because I had been making and budgeting and spending my own money throughout high school, or at least the junior and senior years of high school. And when you get to college, the interesting thing for me, at least, is you do have to worry about your own dollars, but the universities try to make it easier, right? So you pay for room and board in one shot. You have all your meals while you have a dining card, if you will, on an arcane card. You have the money, you could go to the Burger King or whatever on campus. To your point, it's an interesting transition because you don't fully have to worry where your next meal will come from if you spend your money because it's already paid for in your room and board. Granted, you'll have to eat Chartwell's chicken for the next year, but there's something there. So at least if you live on campus, if you're a commuter student, it's probably different. But for me, it's an interesting tethering off to the point of where you have to worry about it all yourself. So I worked throughout college also. And so because you're not paying anything related to your loans or anything like that, it was just the spending money that you have. But the fixed costs, the meals, the dorm, if you will, are covered. So it wasn't that startling.
Was there anything that stands out in your mind as a financial mistake you made during your college years?
Yeah, taking all those loans. Should have just sucked it up and lived at home. But freshman year, I don't think so. Freshman year, I think, was important. If I had to do it again, sophomore, junior, and senior year, I would have just lived at home and used the money that I did make for books. Although books are expensive as can be, you have to prioritize what you can afford today that won't cost you later. And trust me, I've paid for way more books than I ever used in interest on my student loans. So if I had to do it again, I would have fully done what I did freshman year to enjoy the experience and be, quote, away at college, even though I was still in Miami. But after that, I would not have taken all those student loans to continue living out of the house, which is what I ultimately did.
Did your parents kind of try to talk to you about it? Like, hey, if you stay at home, it'll be a lot cheaper.
No, it was the opposite. It was take the loans and get out. Go. Not in a bad way. That was the experience. Both of them grew up in New Jersey. And so they came to the University of Miami for college. And so they were away. And so it was, while I was staying in Miami, that at least I go away to college. It was all in good spirit, but also cost a lot of money.
Right. What did you major in?
Political science and secondary education.
What were you planning on doing with political science and secondary education post?
Nothing. I was planning on being a sports agent. But my mother, who was the associate dean of education, said if I was going to get a free education because of her, free, you can't see my air quotes, that I was going to have a job when I got out. And if I did business or something like that, I may not have one ready and waiting when I got out. So she pushed me into education, for which I threw a fit. An 18-year-old throwing a fit to her, my aunt, everyone, that just because she was a teacher, she couldn't make me be a teacher, but she could. And I did. And it worked out perfectly. It was exactly what I did enjoy. And while I knew I wouldn't spend my career in the classroom, it gave me experiences that I am much happier that I went that route through teaching and school administration and district administration, and even what I do now that it involves children in school districts. And it was all the right decision. I hate to admit it. She will listen to this because it's the two of us.
What was the first thing that you did? Like, you graduate and you're out into the workforce. What was that like? One, getting that job, and how did you go about figuring all that out?
I went back to my high school alma mater that I did my student teaching at. So I'd only been gone 3.5 years when I did my student teaching. Went back right away as a teacher there at the grand salary of $32,000 a year for a starting teacher in 2004. Lived at home for a few months, but if you know anything about 2004, real estate prices were still going up. It was ridiculous. It just kept going, and so felt the need to buy a place before it got crazy. Not as an investment, just because I didn't want to not then be able to afford a place in Miami. And so I bought a condo far south from where I guess I had grown up, call it 15 minutes south of where I grew up, where prices were cheaper. And that was kind of my first big, you have a job. Oh, I did get a car. I got a new car also. But new car, got an apartment, all those things that you had to do in 2004 as prices were skyrocketing.
So you said that you didn't do a lot of talking, like you said, and during childhood, there wasn't a lot of conversation about money. But as you get out of this first job, how are you figuring out how to navigate this? First time car purchase, first time home purchase. Are your parents involved in any way? Like navigating employee benefits? What did that feel like at 20, 21 years old, trying to navigate that?
Yeah, so luckily in the school system, a lot of the things around like employee benefits, retirement, that's taken care of. It's a set package. And so actually there's a huge advantage to starting your career, particularly in some kind of public service or job like that where there's a Florida retirement system, then you didn't have to pay into it. It just happened. Your benefits are there. There's pretty limited options. If you're making 32 grand, you're probably not buying on the health plan. And if you don't have kids, you really don't need to figure anything out other than to take what they give you. Relative to the car and the house, so mine was the opposite. No one talked to me about it. I just made a couple of mistakes to figure it out. The first was I went into the car dealership. I liked the car. I drove it home. My stepdad said, "Why are you here in that car? Did you buy it?" I said, "No, not yet. They told me I could try it for a day." He goes, "Take that thing back right now. You do not take a car away from there until you have bought it." I said, "But they told me." He goes, Trust me, just take the car back. Because if something happens, you don't have insurance on it." So, all right. So I took it back, realized I couldn't afford the one that they let me take home. Had to go back and get a base model of that car. So that was the first misstep, although luckily nothing came of it. But I learned by making a mistake. And then the house was, again, I think it's in my nature, but I went a safer way. It was a condo conversion from apartments. So there were no realtors involved or anything like that. The place that I had found was basically take it or leave it the way it is. Everything's built into the price. I did need help with the down payment from my mom and stepdad, but it was easier than every other house I bought since then, just because I was buying from a condo conversion operation. So, but again, you got to figure out what you can afford. And so you go online and plug numbers into calculators. But I think there was definitely opportunities to have resources or reach out to resources that could have better lined up what those expenses would look like. I taught economics. I teach kids how to budget, or I did teach kids how to budget in a world like this. But when you actually have to do it and there's real money on the line, it's shockingly how few resources there are to actually help you get there. I mean, there's Google, but they don't necessarily have your best interest in mind.
Right. Everything you Google is not true, and contrary to popular opinion.
Completely contrary to popular opinion.
Okay, so tell us a little bit about what surprised you in the process of just being an adult, managing your finances and figuring out life. What was probably something that was like the biggest shock or something that you least expected about grown-up financial life?
So 2 things. Number 1, how hard it was to save. And number 2, all the stuff you didn't count on happening is what kills you. So you know your budget, you know what bills you have. You don't know when the axle is going to break on your car, and that's $400. You don't know when the air conditioner is going to go in your home, and that's $3,000. It's all of those things that, while in theory trying to save for retirement, you're also just trying to save for the next disaster that's going to happen. And how do you do both? Because at least in this day and age, most people don't make enough money where costs are to be able to afford a standard budget, and then the what if budget and all the insurances that can go around with that, and the savings for retirement, which you have to figure out how to prioritize when you're 25 years old or 30 years old, and that's 30 years away. Fixing the AC is a lot more important at that moment in time than saving in your 401k. So what do you do?
Especially if you live in Miami, right?
Ridiculous. It is 90 degrees on March 12th at 9 a.m. It is 90 degrees.
I think I would choose air conditioning too over the next in that moment. So how did you go about thinking about your savings and life in the future? Or was there a certain period of time where you're just kind of like, that's in the back seat, that's in the back seat. Yeah. And then your brain finally kind of was like, it's going to be coming sooner rather than later. What was the light bulb moment for you that said, like, I need to be putting money away for 20 years from now or X number of years from now?
When I made more money.
Wow.
So luckily as a teacher, which isn't a good answer, but you have a built-in retirement account in how the system works. And so my thing always was, I'm not going to worry about retirement now because it's worried about for me in my retirement. If you actually think about the numbers, which in Florida, the Florida retirement system is, you get 1.6% for each year of service. So if you retire at 30 years when you're vested, it's 30 times 1.6. And then you get that percentage of the average of your 5 highest years, which as a teacher is probably 65,000. So it sounds great and it's not bad, but you're still talking about 30 to $4,000 a year for the rest of your life from the age of 52 on is what it would have been for me. Sounds great when you're 22. You're probably not going to live so well as a 54-year-old on $30,000 a year, especially since you can't get Social Security for a while. So I think all those things, they're deceiving, big time deceiving. So the reality and the answer to that question is until I became an assistant superintendent and now in the private sector and made some more money than I made as a teacher, it's not that it didn't cross my mind, it just wasn't feasible. And again, even months now where I make a very good salary, if summer camp hits in that month and you got to pay for it for 2 kids, then you're probably not saving a whole lot that month. So that's just the reality of it. There's a lot of ways to make it sound better, but that's at least my reality.
So what would you say to encourage someone who is in that kind of phase? And what if they're committing to being a teacher for the next 20 years? You ended up taking a different path and, like you said, earning a different income. How would you encourage those people to feel excited about the opportunities that come with saving despite them not having the biggest income ever?
Yeah, I think there's a number of ways. So first of all, teaching firefighters, police, you don't choose those jobs for the money. At the end of the day, you choose those jobs because you want to make a difference. You choose those jobs because it's a calling. There's days today where I wish I was back at Miami Killian Senior High School teaching a government class like I used to in 2006. Those were great days. And there's days that I go on a political rant on social media and former students of mine chime in with things that I taught them about, which make me really proud. And that's why you become a teacher. Those moments, cliche and cheesy as it sounds, are worth more than some of that savings at the end of the day. But what I would tell you is this: while you may have a harder time saving in those jobs, they are more secure jobs. While I make more money than that now, in the private sector, you could be let go tomorrow. As a teacher, particularly in this day and age with the critical shortage for teachers, unless you're really bad and thus not good for kids, you're going to have a job. And there's something to be said for not worrying about the fact that you will always have this stream of revenue. It will always marginally go up. Teachers are not paid enough anyway. I can't say that enough or emphatically enough, but the answer directly to your question is you may not save a lot and you may have to count on that retirement system and invest ahead now for the things that will allow you to save more later. And so what I would say to that is all of those plans that try to help you pay a little bit more on your mortgage to take 5 years off of it, Florida prepaid or college accounts that allow you to save for your children up front so that when you turn 45, 50, 55, and you are making the higher salary in the mid 60s, you don't have the debt of your home and college, so that at least at that point, you can start to stockpile savings towards the end of your working career that can then compound to add to your retirement. I don't know if that's the fiscally sound financial planner way to answer that question, but that's what I would tell you just on, again, the reality of what's likely possible if you're making $42,000 a year, $45,000 a year as a teacher.
Awesome. I think it's really important to hear it from the point of view of someone who's been in those shoes before and strategies that exist and available and that it can be done. You know, you got to just think about the way that you can best do it for yourself. And the best thing that anyone can do is plan ahead, like you said. And speaking of this, like as a teacher, you're teaching a lot of kids, but you also have your own children. So what are you going to tell your kids about money that maybe your parents didn't tell you? What are you teaching them now about money? What's the message for children that they need to be hearing about money?
Yeah, I think, well, first, the hardest point is just understanding what money is and the value of things, right? So we went to Disney this past weekend, which again is a luxury that I can afford my children because of where I'm at in life. But it's not a reality to run to every store at Disney and buy something. Even if you can afford it, that's not a reality. So trying to teach them, even though they're 2 and 4, that money has a value, right? At the end of the day, not everyone has it. Just because you have it doesn't mean you spend it. And because they're 2 and 4, the lesson, at least at this point in our lives, is you will get one thing. You've been great. You deserve it. You've earned it. But what one thing do you want? Because you have to think about that all day. Even if you're 2 years old, you're going to get one. If you pick that one thing now at 10 a.m., by 4 p.m., you've already picked your one thing. Trying to understand that things have a value, that they're finite, that you can't just get whatever you want just because either mommy and daddy can afford it or because you can. I think at the end of the day, even if you have money, it is finite, right? There's a value to everything, and there's cost benefit analysis and whether you want something or not. And so, at least for the foreseeable future, that's the lesson, which is whether you have it or not right now is irrelevant. There's still a value, and you still have to determine if what you're getting is worth what you're spending.
I think that's a really great lesson.
They don't like it. They want everything.
They can't like it at 2 and 4. They want everything now. Why not? And yeah, the world's their oyster, but it's an important lesson to learn, and the sooner the better, I think. All right, so we're going to wrap up with a quick lightning round. Just a few questions, short, snappy answers, and then we'll be done. All right, you have $20 in your pocket right now. What do you spend it on?
$20 in my pocket. What? Coffee, probably.
Ah.
My 2-year-old doesn't sleep, so you gotta get through the day somehow.
Best advice you've ever received?
From my wife. Live in the moment. I suck at it, but it's a really good piece of advice.
Live in the moment. Yes. Worst money habit?
Buying coffee. It is a complete waste of $5 a day, but it seems to happen.
We're going to buy you a coffee maker.
I have a coffee maker. I can show you. I have 3 of them. Somehow I still go buy coffee. That's the problem.
Everybody's got something.
Exactly.
Something you do for fun that doesn't cost anything.
Take the kids to the park.
Those are the things that usually matter the most. And last but not least, can you share with us one thing you would like to improve about your personal finances in the upcoming year?
Yeah, I think we've touched on it a couple of times. It's just more savings. At the end of the day, my wife and I make a very good living now. And every month we still look at each other and go, with what we make, how do we not have more in savings? Until you sit down and actually itemize it out. And again, I mean, I'm part of an executive team for a really large company, and I manage their money just fine because that's my job. But in your own life, it's a lot harder to stick to a budget or even take the time to create one. Just be more deliberate about savings. I mean, we do all the things looking forward. We have insurance, life insurance, college plans, but for the immediate, buying less of the things we don't need and immediately putting that into savings.
Awesome. I think that saving is a great goal. And one of the things I always tell people is pay yourself first. And so when sitting down and thinking about how to create the budget for the month, we often prioritize the bills and the mortgage and those things like that. But when you prioritize yourself and say, I'm worth it, and pay yourself first, I think that's a great way to go about kind of increasing the savings and figuring everything else out versus leaving that savings as the last thing and saying, oh, okay, well, this is what we got left over. This is what we can save. Andrew, thanks so much for being on the show. Can you tell us a little bit about where we can find you, what you're working on now, how we can support you in your projects?
Well, thank you so much. And actually, that was great advice. I came on a podcast and got a free financial planning session. This is great.
I'll send you the bill later.
That's fair. That's fair. So as I told you, I did work in schools, and I've looked at the effects of adverse childhood experiences on children. And that's what I'm working on now. It is therapeutic relief to mitigate or eradicate the effects of adverse childhood experiences on young children and even older children as those things continue to weigh on them and end up in unfortunate statistical likelihoods that we all wish we could avoid for children, particularly children who come from tough home lives. And so that's what I'm working on now. I can be reached on emails, probably the easiest since I'm on my phone all the time. The Gmail is apost613, apost613 @gmail.com. I do that work for a company called Invo Healthcare, which is just a great mission-driven company. And it's a blessing to be able to do what you love and be able to support your family doing it. So I'm very fortunate.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for being on the show today, Andrew. Really appreciate it. And looking forward to publishing this episode of Worth Listening.
I look forward to listening to a podcast for the first time.
I hope you enjoyed listening to Andrew's money memoir. Andrew drove home the point that choosing a career shouldn't just be about the money. When choosing a job or career, there are many other things to consider beyond the compensation. Some people are called to their job because they're called to help people, and it sometimes doesn't come with the highest pay. But even when money is tight, it is important to plan for the future. I always tell people, put your oxygen mask on first. That way you'll be able to help more people when you've first taken care of yourself. It's a hard thing to do, but it's definitely a worthwhile effort so that you can really be able to do the things you want. He also brought up one of the many factors that contribute to the lack of financial literacy among young professionals. We get to college and we think, I'm a grown-up. I made it. Yes. But for many of us, it's the first time that we're out on our own, acting as an adult, and we don't realize how many adult life skills that you just don't have yet because you went from high school with your parents to college and being a grown-up. Some of those skills were prevented from learning because of this automation process for the basic necessities. So what about room and board and your meal plan that are all rolled up into this lump sum and you just show up every day and the food's taken care of for you? It's really easy to get disconnected from the idea that there's cost of living related to these things. These things cost a certain amount of money and kind of really feeling connected to the idea of what the cost of something is and how to prepare yourself from an earning standpoint and, life skill standpoint for what is to come next. Of course, I think that a life skills or a personal financial planning class should be mandatory in college and that it would serve us so much better than some of those general education courses that we are forced to take. But I'm not going down the rabbit hole of trying to fix the whole educational system in one podcast. So let's move on to the word of the day. Money emotion. Andrew talked about how easy handling the finances for a company were, but it wasn't as easy for him to take care of his personal finances. The reason is simple. Money is emotional. It's easier to be objective when you remove the direct connection to the funds. Literacy and intellect are helpful in organizing your finances, but the emotional aspect makes it hard to be objective. That's where a financial planner comes in. And I say that as a financial planner who has a financial planner. Yes, I can crunch the numbers myself. I have the literacy and the intellect. But can I truly be objective in sorting through the decision-making process for the best way for me to accomplish my goals and my dreams? Probably not. Well, that's all I got for you guys. Thank you for tuning in today. We hope you found this episode worth listening to. If you have financial questions, suggestions for guests, or would love to share your own money memoir, please contact us through our website, worth-listening.com. Take care.